Hello, everyone. Hello, culture makers. I'm Kelly Diels, and I am here with Vivienne McMaster, who is the founder of Be Your Own Beloved. And we are going to talk about how everything that's been used against us can be turned into a source of power. And I reached out to Vivienne because I followed Vivienne for a few years. And I think she's doing something so interesting, which is she is using photos and selfies to help us reclaim our sense of power and our faith in ourselves, which is interesting because women in particular have often, imagery has been used against us. Photos and what we see on screen and on pages has been used against us and used to make us feel not worthy, subservient, less than, and Vivienne's helping us reclaim that medium. And I think it's particularly acute for anyone whose body is outside of, what is considered acceptable or attractive in the world. Mm-hmm. So those issues tend to be particularly acute for us. And this medium in particular tends to be very fraught for us. So I'm so curious about what led you to this business or this insight that we could use these mediums in an affirming way rather than a dehumanizing way.
Mm-hmm. My own lived experience coming into my late 20s, and just my self-esteem was quite crippling. And I didn't mean to use photography as a tool at all. It just happened that digital photography was developing and was much more accessible at that time. And so I got a camera and just immediately started playing with being in the frame. And it felt so empowering because it was this tool that had been used against us. And I find it's way more subtle even than we realize how much we carry of those messages. And that was the case for me. And I just felt like for the first time, this medium that was used against me, I could be the narrator of this story. Messy way through figuring out what my new narrative was. And it took me a while to kind of break out of the type of selfies that are very contained. Selfies actually wasn't even a word yet at this time. It wasn't that long ago, but it's the way things have been in the last decade. So I learned to use the timer and started to put my body in the frame. And I think that's where the way we often take selfies is very contained. And once we break out of that, a whole lot of body stories come up. And that was the case for me, but I just kept going, and really the feeling of using this as a tool to put aside all my sense of self had been very much in others' hands, others' perceptions. Even though this wasn't necessarily people saying critical things about me, just the idea that they could, the idea that, that if they saw this sideways perspective of my belly, what would other people say? God forbid. And that just started to lose its power. And what gained was that I could see an image and not react to it. It takes time, but the more we kind of see our body and see ourselves, the more we can reclaim that power back from others' voices. And age helps a little bit too, I gotta say. You just start to care less about what anyone else thinks. Yeah.
What you're saying right now about looking at images of yourself, it started to almost break the spell, or you became more familiar with it and it didn't activate all of those internalized narratives. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something that Lindy West wrote in her book, Shrill. Yeah. And she wrote about one of the ways that she came into her power and really got to a place of radical self-acceptance was that she discovered, well, she didn't write this in particular, but I know this particular detail, but she discovered the Adipositivity Project. Yeah. And she looked at pictures of fat bodies and fat people until it no longer upset her or activated her, and until she could see people's humanity. So she looked at fat bodies until she could see the beauty in them and didn't have all those internal narratives coming up. And
Yeah.
that helped her then accept her body. So she used photos and the medium of photography as a
Totally.
liberatory tool. And it reminds me so much of what you're saying, which is you did that personally. So Lindy went and looked at pictures of other people's bodies to get rid of her own fat phobia and radically accept herself.
Exactly.
And you were looking at your own body to get rid of those internalized narratives about women's bodies.
At the same time, I will say Tumblr was rocking and rolling with fat bodies. And so there was that element for me too, I followed a whole bunch of those kind of fat positive Tumblrs at the time. And there was that element. Well, my photos were quite different than the super sexy, fabulous ones I was following there. There was definitely that element of seeing fabulous fat bodies. And I think the photographer Shuglet is a great one right now to follow. If somebody listening is like, well, I want to do that, Adipositivity Project is still alive and well and has a lot to look at.
Yes.
And Shuglet as well is another one to do that process of acclimatizing ourselves to seeing fatness without reacting. And another piece of that is that in a way, I think it can be helpful to offer other people humanity. Even sometimes that helps us realize, well, I got to do that for myself. And there was definitely a point where I was like, I was doing portrait sessions for people, and just the way that I would like look through the camera with like such love and respect for their bodies. And I wouldn't be seeing them with any critique. I wasn't seeing them through a fat phobic lens, or whatever kind of the way that they varied from, say, the messages and the images were given, which everybody, including that person in the photoshopped ad, looks different from that kind of idealized norm. I was looking at everybody else with this compassionate lens, and it hit me that like, okay, I got to dive in. So looking at those images on Instagram or in some of my classes, I encourage people on Instagram, you can save folders or you can save images. And then it's great because it still links to that person and has you able to look at their images. But you can just save yourself a little like fat positive, body positive folder that you could look at on tough days. And so it's such a good tool.
I think that's a great tool. I save things all the time when I'm trying to like train myself to do something or expand my knowledge. On Instagram, I'm like saving and bookmarking and organizing things like that all the time. It's a really useful tool. And it's so interesting that you say that when you realize how much compassion you were having for other people, it asked you to have that same compassion. So that's like a power building tool, which is to apply the same compassion and love you would extend to other people, to yourself. Yeah. I had a similar experience with that, Vivienne, when I became a mom of 2 little girls. And I realized the things that I was doing to my own body. I would never, ever in a million years do that to my children. I would never starve them. I would never talk shame to them. I would just never do those things. And when I realized like I wouldn't do those things to them, it was like, well, how can I possibly do it to myself? And if I'm doing it to myself, what are they going to do to themselves?
And if you're doing it to yourself, you are doing it to them.
You are doing it to them, right? Yeah. So that was instructive. And it wasn't just instructive around body image. It was also instructive about the people I led in my life. Right? Like having children means you put a boundary. It's like, if you wouldn't let that person in your children's life, what are they doing in yours?
Yeah.
So these things, like our empathy and love for other people, when we reflect it back on ourselves, it makes us hold boundaries and apply higher standards to the care that we extend to ourselves. And that is that's a power building tool.
Yeah. Why do we put ourselves so on the bottom?
Right.
There. We're taught to.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
There's another thing about when I'm thinking about the lens and photography as a source of power. So there's 2 things actually I'm thinking about. So I'm thinking about Sonia Renee Taylor and her amazing platform, The Body Is Not an Apology, and her book, The Body Is Not an Apology, which is like one of the best books that I read in 2018 when it came out. I just loved that book. So the body's not an apology. How Sonia Renee Taylor got her start building like this really large online platform, which is power building, was that she put a photo of herself in a bustier up on Facebook.
Yeah.
And suddenly that photo went viral, as a fat, black, dark-skinned woman being just overtly sexual and loving the way she looked and putting this image up. That's what got her a whole bunch of attention and sort of seeded the platform that it grew into. Now, she of course came with skills and analysis and years of that.
Totally.
But putting that photograph up and claiming that space for herself, like launched the virality of the platform.
Totally.
So I kind of want to make a point that our images and the way that we've held back from being in images, that's structural, right? Like there's this narrative that says we're not allowed to be in photos because we don't meet this like ridiculous patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist norm.
Totally.
So then we disappear from photos, which means now we don't have a power building tool at our disposal. And that's especially true if you're trying to build any kind of business online. When I get hired for a corporation to do brand work, what's the first job? The first job is for me to go through and build an image database that we can use out in the world to build brand awareness and power. And if women and fat people and Indigenous, Black, people of color, queer, gender nonconforming people can't build an image database to use to build their business, that's a massive power tool that is no longer at their disposal. So we like being able to reclaim the lens and to reclaim imagery and be visible is how we build power. And it's something that shouldn't be withheld from us. So we kind of have to reclaim it.
Yeah. And you have to, being able to be in your own images as well is pretty important. So many people are invisible from their work, I notice.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. It's, I just have I'm always kind of seeing through this lens of photography and body image. It's interesting. You mentioned the Sonia Renee Taylor moment. And, every time I read a biography or a, Lindy West, I'm like, that's the moment with the photo.
Right.
There's these moments where, sorry, my cat is climbing in my seats. My seat, stop it. I'm just gonna let it go. Cats. But yeah, there's these moments often for people where they have to choose to be visible in their work. And I think it happens in people's own time. You can build a body of work without being visible, but it takes away from people being able to make eye contact with the person who's doing this work. It definitely, I think, puts a wall between stepping into your power as an entrepreneur. I also just want to add, and this is kind of where my work differs from a lot of other maybe photographers, where I also want to acknowledge that you can do this work completely separate from social media. You can do it totally for yourself. You never have to share for it to be worthy. I think we get very caught up in social media and self-promotion. And sometimes when we're doing this healing work, it kind of has to be for ourselves. I think it does, period, have to be for ourselves first and foremost. And sometimes always thinking about where this is going, who's going to see it, doesn't let us really stand in our power with the work of healing. So whether, every image that I take is possibly used for my work, and often they are, but it has to be taken for me first. Otherwise, I'm not really standing in my power.
That's so critical.
Yeah.
And I had this moment too, Vivienne, and I think it was probably like 2008, and I didn't have a Facebook account. I didn't have a Twitter account. I didn't have a blog yet, but I got a phone that had a camera on it, and I started taking pictures of myself, and I started taking pictures of my body, and like being in the frame, and I didn't have that language. But what I was seeing it was interesting. So what I could see was certain angles made me look like 20% more like the norm, you know? And I suddenly realized like, well, if I can do this with angles and look more attractive or more this or more that, and I'm like attractive, with scare quotes, but then imagine how people who are models and how these images are being manipulated by entire teams of professionals. If I can manipulate the image in this way with like zero skills and a phone in my hand. So that was like a big sort of epiphany. It was like, oh my goodness, what I'm looking at is so manipulated. And I knew that intellectually because, you know, I came up in the time where we were criticizing media and criticizing magazines and women's magazines. Like I knew that intellectually, but when I could see the difference in my own, like how I could manipulate it. So that was one epiphany. And then the second epiphany was when I was taking pictures of myself, I was like, oh my God, like this is so beautiful. And I read a book at the time, around the same time, by Kim Britton. And she wrote about how she was taking selfies and like took a selfie of her naked back and then looked at it and was like, well, like, no wonder, you know, like my partner is so smitten with me. Like, look at that. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had this epiphany of how manipulated images were and how easy it was to manipulate them. And also an epiphany around like, wow, I'm pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was like not at all going anywhere. Nobody else was seeing those. That wasn't about social media, but it really was like an affirmation. And so that personal validation doesn't have to be a performance on social media. And I just love that you brought that up and brought that to our attention.
I think it's pivotal because I think if it's always for somebody else, then it's always for somebody else. And to really reclaim your own narrative, like even if you share it the next day, like if it's useful to you. I'm struggling a little bit the way sometimes we use our body acceptance epiphanies to try to go viral. You know, that's a whole other topic, but I'm struggling with that a little bit right now and feeling like as an entrepreneur, I should be posting about some epic realization when I'm at the point of my own healing when I just want to be somebody who's living a life that they thought they couldn't live because of their body size or because they didn't believe their worthiness. You know, I'm living with this wonderful partner and our daughter. Like those were the things that I stopped myself for honestly a decade. Yeah. Because I didn't believe my body was worthy of being loved, which is like, so I'm struggling a little bit with like feeling like the norm these days is that we need to sell our body acceptance or perform it. So another more reason to just really just do it for yourself first and foremost. And then if you want to share it and say it goes viral, awesome. But I'm sure Sonia Renee Taylor didn't post it intending that. It happens when we are so true to ourselves and so in our power, you know?
That is the truth. And that's, so I write about the female lifestyle empowerment brand, and I write about how there is this pressure on all women, whether or not you own a business or trying to be public, you know, be in the public eye, there's a pressure on all women to frame ourselves as saleable. To turn ourselves into brands and items to be consumed. So when I'm hearing you say like you have this like discomfort right now about how we're supposed to sell our healing epiphanies and our images of our body acceptance, that's what I'm feeling like you're resisting, which is like and you're saying you want us to be in charge of our own narratives, to be the narrators in our own life. I'm saying that I think that what I realized before was I was framing myself as an object to be consumed. And that is indeed what we are trained to do. And when we're talking about objectification and these images that are dehumanizing and limiting our lives, that's what we're talking about. We have been trained to be objects in a frame. And you and I are saying, how about we be subjects inventing the story?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's wild how subtle this like notion of our bodies are for sale is sometimes, like when we don't even think we're doing it, but we are.
Right, because that's the water we're in, right? Like we don't feel the temperature of it or even feel that we're in water. We're all in the water, so we're all wet. And we are trained from the moment we're born, if we're born into feminized bodies, to be objects and to see ourselves as objects and be like the shiniest, best objects we can be. And what you're saying is, how about we use the medium of photography to be the narrators, to be the subjects instead of to be the objects. And that's a reclaiming of power. It's a resistance of objectification and subjectification.
Yeah, absolutely. So
how can people do this? like you have a course called Be Your Own Beloved. Like what are some tips that you could share with people about using the lens or using screens to reclaim their power?
Start with start with telling the story of your life. Like just, most of us are in lockdown-ish life right now. We're in our homes, we're in kind of our bubble. We can start inviting ourselves into the frame, and selfies get seen as just our faces. And it can be anything. It could be your hands, your reflection. So I really encourage people just to play around with starting to get their body in the photo. We don't have to have like a body epiphany the first day. It's interesting in my classes, like people come in with, they think they should be taking professional level photos. They think they should have it all figured out on day one. We just have all this pressure, and sometimes you just have to play. So start playing with the lens is what I encourage. And then, once you kind of let yourself play, you may want to take a photo of your back in the mirror, or you may want to kind of start exploring your body more, but just take a step into it is what I encourage. A lot of the people that I kind of work with, I feel a bit are the folks who are left out of the body conversation around selfies, and where taking a nude photo might be like so far out of what they're ready for, or they don't see themselves in even those visuals on some of the social medias where they're like a bit older, and they're not seeing aging bodies, or folks who live in a small town and don't have some fancy urban life, and don't have access to buying a lot of stuff. So just folks who, may not fit that kind of like younger selfie savvy bubble. And to really start just letting yourself be in the frame and however you're comfortable, and not expecting it to be some fancy photo at first. Another kind of piece I would recommend playing with is noticing good and bad photos, and how you, and I say this meaning I don't actually want you to see yourself in a good and bad framework, but at first we have to notice, like, what am I seeing as worthy? What am I seeing as unworthy? Because all of it is worthy. Your outtakes, every photo you don't like is actually probably more healing and more important than the one you might possibly share online. Taking a lot of photos, just letting yourself play and getting a fair number of images on your phone, and then letting yourself peek at them every once in a while. Maybe play with an app to process them, because really, it's not about the outcome. It's not about the actual photo that we may share. It's about the process of being with this person in the image. And the more we see them, especially in photos we might see in a bad category, the more when we take photos, we don't expect some version of ourselves that may be the professional photography photo. Or I think expectation is a big problem with their relationships to photos, especially if you're not in photos a lot. You expect you of 10 years ago to be there. You have a different size. They're really kind of like infiltrated with growing older and size and fat phobia, kind of having those expectations on our body that we should fit. When we're photographed, we should only look like this. The more you see photos of yourself, the more you're like, 42-year-old Vivienne had a baby 10 months ago. That's who I see. I don't see that. That said, my body was pretty much looked a little bit pregnant my whole life. I got asked more if I was pregnant before I was.
Right. There's something there about that you said to me that was just so enormously healing just now. When you said the photos that we don't like might actually be the healing opportunity, who might actually be more healing than the photos we do like. And something happened over the summer where I was like really surprised. I'd done all this work, was so comfortable in my body, and then suddenly over the summer was just not happy with myself, not happy with my body. And I was then mad at myself because I've done all this work to get free of this narrative. And suddenly I'm like right back there. Obviously I didn't do the work well enough. It didn't stick. And so I've got this narrative about like not doing the work well enough and it didn't stick. But what had happened was I had just gone through some changes.
Yeah.
And so then I had to like, you know, accept that. And what is also going on is the culture is still out there doing its dehumanizing, cruel thing to me. So it's not like that you do the work one and done and like now you're magically free of all these social messages, because they're still coming at you every day in every way. And so it's not like a one and done thing. So what I did was because I was like in this place of radical discomfort with my own body, I booked a photo session and I was like, we're going to do some exposure therapy here.
Exactly. That's what it is. Yeah.
Right? I'm going to look at these photos until I like myself again. And I did get the photos back and I was unhappy with them. And the person is massively talented, right? It wasn't that. It was like I was looking at it and I was not happy with what I saw. But then I started looking at them differently. I zoomed out and thought, what is it that I'm not liking? So I didn't like that I had wrinkles around my eyes and I've never seen them before. This is a new experience for me. And then I zoomed out. I'm like, okay, so what does our culture say about women and wrinkles that is making me think that those things are a problem? And our culture says that women are not valuable once they age, right? And so I was like, well, is that true? Well, no, it's not. Well, okay, now I like that photo, right?
Exactly.
So like zooming out to the social context is enormously freeing. It's like a shame buster. And then I could like get into my power. I'm like, oh, what I'm seeing are signs of age and wisdom, right? I'm going to cultivate that.
Yeah. You had this expectation on what your photo should look like. And it was what, 5 years ago, Kelly? And
it's a social expectation about what is acceptable for me to look like.
Yeah.
So zooming out and realizing, oh, this isn't personal at all. This is like social conditioning. This is oppression at work. And I can like refuse it.
And it makes me think of, you said you had gone on this path and you'd expected this stuff to just stick. What I do find is you probably used all those tools you knew before and were more resilient than maybe you would have been a few years ago with those photos. And we're able to zoom out. I think that's something we need to remember as we're doing this healing work. It's not linear. And the more we do it, the more when it happens again, we're like, what worked last time? Okay, zoom out. Let's see. We have these tools at hand. We're getting this like toolbox filled with these options. Or like, okay, when was the last time I saw a photo of myself? 6 months ago. Okay, where's my camera? Like we could use that self-knowledge and access those tools to help us
and we move through
be more
process
resilient.
faster.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
And so like I said that I was mad at myself because it didn't stick. But before, it took me like a couple of years to get okay. And this time I was like, I got okay in a couple of weeks, right? I had some tools and I got okay. So you move faster because you already do have those tools. And I want to point out that tool of being able to zoom out and see the structural forces at play, that's a power tool. Like that's a liberation tool. And I teach that to people all the time. Is like, if you want to get into your power, you have to have the ability to analyze the system. You've got to be able to zoom out and see, this isn't my personal defect. There's nothing wrong with me, but there is something wrong with this context and this institution. So that's a massive shame buster and power builder. And then I wanted to return to something that you had talked about people who kind of can't be embodied in their own feed. So in their own Instagram, and I've had this experience, I've done this personally, and it happens all the time with entrepreneurs, feminist entrepreneurs I work with, that we are not even visible in our own work.
Yeah.
Right? So we're doing all this work, but you can't see us. If you go, you could even look at my Instagram feed right now, and maybe like every couple of rows, there's a picture of me, but I'm not terribly embodied in my own feed. And that's literally something that I'm like, okay, I need to be more visible as the originator of my work that you're engaging with. Like an actual person created this, and this is the person who created this. And entrepreneurs will come to me and I'll go look at their social media feeds and they are nowhere to be seen. And I've even had fat women and people of color come to me and say, I literally don't put images up on my own bio because it activates other people's biases and undermines my brand. So I just want to talk about like how revolutionary it is to make sure your own feed, that you're showing up in it. And even when we look outside of the business context at our personal photo albums, often the older women are missing. My mom is missing from my entire childhood of photo albums because she didn't want to be in those photos because she looked too fat or her hair wasn't done or what have you. And I find myself doing the same thing. So like we have to reclaim those documents, right, and those spaces, and show up in the photos of our lives.
Absolutely. And one thing I would suggest is like, it's great to get a professional photo shoot done, but I think that becomes the like, oh, one day when I feel good enough about my body, I'll get a photo shoot. It becomes this like finish line of someday. And I think entrepreneurs can think about just now, like, what could I do now? What am I working on? I encourage people, especially entrepreneurs, to think about practicing what they're preaching. What are you preaching in your work? Well, how could I like take a photo, whether it's like show up and put your pen to paper. You could take a photo of your hand and put pen to paper. You know, think about like what messages, because I find if it's just about like putting my face on my Instagram, that's a lot of pressure. That just immediately brings a lot of those messages. But if you're like thinking about how you can serve your audience more by stepping into visibility in a way that's like, okay, I'm gonna offer it to others and in turn help myself. But it really is for yourself as well. So just to be able to ease into the process, and it doesn't actually need to be your face. It's good to have your face on your about page, but it doesn't have to be some fancy photo. I see all the time images that I can tell are selfies, and I love it. Like, start there. Start with just playing around with the camera and find a photo that would just feel like something you could put on your Instagram. Another thing I notice is so many Instagrams or Facebooks are filled with quotes and also all these other things that we're supposed to do. And then I see people's stories and I'm like, oh, hi, that's the person behind it. I feel like there's a lot more permission we give ourselves in our stories, probably because of impermanence. So that could be a place where somebody begins kind of letting themselves be visible in something that's impermanent, if that makes you more comfortable. Right. You know?
I love that you can leverage the ephemera of social media, that it just disappears into your timeline, and it's not like you had to, print it out and put it on a park bench.
Yeah, it's not on your feed forever. That said, I would encourage you to eventually try putting it on your feed or take photos and do that. But I think it's a good stepping stone. And a lot of people do things, no makeup, they don't hide their messy houses. They just let themselves, like, this is the real person behind this work. And it's really refreshing.
Yeah. And, there's two things here that are coming up for me. So one is about taking up space, right? And not allowing ourselves to be erased from the public eye, or even just our own lives, right? Like, actually, a friend of mine, Danusha Melina Durbin, says, like, it's important for us women, especially, and mothers, to be the centers of their own lives. We're not the centers of the world, but we have to be the centers of our own lives. And I feel like what you're talking about here is encouraging us to see ourselves as the center of our own lives and to take pictures to remind ourselves, like, we exist.
Totally. Yeah.
And then there's another thing that I'm thinking about. I saw Dawn Sarah, who is a mutual of both of ours, post a picture that her partner had taken of her, and she was working her way through the Be Your Own Beloved challenge. And Dawn had put her phone in a tree, like in a tree, and then so it was wedged, so then she could back up and like be in the frame of the whole picture. And I just love that. And her partner had like snapped a picture of Dawn like setting up this photo in the wild with a tree. But I just love that because it was like the encouragement to be creative. You don't necessarily have to have a selfie stick or although that's great, but to be creative and then try to get different parts of your body in the frame. Like, it's not just about this. Yeah. It's about like taking up your space that you occupy in the world.
Totally. Yeah. That's the danger of taking a class with me. You're probably going to put a phone in a tree or on a fence or on a bench and not care what anyone's thinking.
I just loved it. It opened something
Yeah.
up for me. And after I saw that I actually did go online and order a selfie stick, so I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to get in the frame, and I don't have a tree in my office. So like, let's get an actual tool.
This is one of my favorite at-home tricks. Put it up to your coffee mug. Or, like I often have a coffee mug in the stroller. I put my camera on my stroller. You just figure out a spot to put it without even a stand. There's plenty. The world is at the ready to put your phone down or your camera and take your photo.
So can we talk about, like, personally, what have you seen? So we were talking about how you had this personal epiphany and you were using the lens to build up your sense of power and your sense of self and reclaim it. And that was just like you stumbled into that personally.
Yeah.
So then what brought you then? So that's a power builder. It's a personal power builder. This has also been like a livelihood builder and a career builder for you. And so you turned this source of shame and this source of pain into a source of power. So can you tell us about that transition?
I started teaching classes initially, I think it was 2010, 2011. So a while ago. And at first they were more about self-portrait photography, and then I'd sneak in the self-love. And that there was a couple years of that. And after a while I was like, I can't talk about aperture and shutter speed anymore. It's not what I'm on the planet to teach. And then I came up with the term be your own beloved. I actually want to mention my initial classes were called You Are Your Own Muse, which does not flow. But if you ever have a bad name for a class, trust that it's going to lead to a good one, because be your own beloved. Yes. It led to that. But I was like, I lost a fair amount of my audience in that transition, but I was like, this is what it's about. And so that's felt like when I really stepped into my power in teaching this work. Maybe I needed that time to ease towards it, because a lot of us like have these learning experiences and turn them into businesses. But in a way, we need time to really be able to trust that I can be a leader, I can be a teacher in this work. And I still struggle with that in some ways. Because I'm just somebody who had some realizations, but I keep on showing up in this work, and I keep on having the fuel to talk about it. And there keeps on being so many people absent from the visual story of their life. But yeah, I just started teaching classes, and they had a response, and they continue to have a response of people being like, oh, I needed this, or I'm terrified of this. Here I am anyways. And they really have to step into their power when they press purchase with me. It's an interesting thing as an entrepreneur to have something that is so scary to people that you teach.
So there's something here I want to underline, because I had the same experience, Vivienne. So I want to note that growth comes with loss, right? Like it's not just like grow, more. Growth comes with loss. And if you even think about it with like a garden, in order to grow, you have to like dig up something that was used for something else. So there's like a loss of the flower garden to create the vegetable garden, or a loss of the vegetable garden to create the flower garden. But there's always a loss involved in growth. So you said when you started doing this, you lost some of your audience. This is also what happened to me when I started writing about the female lifestyle empowerment brand, instead of just being like go entrepreneurialism. And I lost half my list in like the space of a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to happen, and I was okay with it, but it kind of stung. But I just want to note that, like, in order to grow and get into your power, you have to lose the things or the metrics that were keeping you out of your power.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like the type of photography I was teaching was very more conceptual in our heads, and planning and thought. And what I ask of people is to be very present with themselves. That's just not easy. And I think that, it definitely took, it's less for the photography community and far more for just people. And so what I feel like I lost was the people who just wanted a photography class. And, but there's plenty of other inspiration out for whoever you're losing. They'll find someone else, and you've grown out of it. So you can't keep serving them because they want the old you.
Right. And there's something here, though, about, I just want to
Mhm.
return to about, okay, there is this narrative in this story about which bodies are deserving of rights,
Mhm.
resources, affection, love,
Mhm.
attention, space.
Yeah.
And all of us have absorbed it, not because we're defective, but because this is what we have been born into. None of us have been born into a culture of justice.
Yeah.
And so it takes actual work to get back into your personal power and sort of unlearn those narratives.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I just love that this is something that you can do that kind of builds power on two levels. Like, it's almost like multitasking. So you
Mm.
can build personal power and affirmation and get free of this
Yeah.
negative self-talk that's been imposed on us. And you can actually use it out in the world to
Yeah.
build livelihood and brand and personal power in
Mhm.
that. And
Yeah.
then you can leverage that to be a culture maker and start shaping a culture in which those narratives no longer are true. So it's like
Yeah.
you can use this three ways at once.
That's awesome. Yeah, and
Well,
very
that's what you're
true.
doing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
I
I
just
see
hadn't heard it
you
framed that
doing,
way.
Vivienne.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't really heard it framed in that way. It's great.
But you taking up space helps the
Mhm.
rest of us take up space. And maybe for
Mhm.
people who are watching this right now, you taking up space helps the
Mhm.
rest of us take space.
Yeah.
And that helps us get free.
Yeah, totally. And to keep showing up and talking about this path as being nonlinear, I'm still having healing around this work, what, 10 years in?
Well, I think that's because the injuries keep coming, right? Like,
Yeah,
we still
exactly, like you
are
were
navigating
saying.
oppression.
Yeah, we need to remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this has been amazing. I have loved talking to you. I've been in your orbit for several years, and I think this is the first time that you and I've had an actual conversation.
I
This has been
realized that.
delightful.
I was like, have I talked to Kelly before? Because I feel like I have.
I felt like I have too, but this is our
Totally.
actual first
That's
time.
awesome.
And I'm just so grateful for your work. I'm so
Oh, thank
grateful
you.
that you show up the way that you do and that you give us permission to be
Thanks.
ourselves instead of having to perform selves that are socially acceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you. And thank you everyone who's watching this Facebook Live with Vivienne and I. And I just want to remind us where we started, which is that everything that has been used against us can be a source of power. And
Mhm.
then what you want to do is strategize about what are different mediums where I can build power. And sometimes you're not going to feel it, but eventually you get there. If you just
Mhm.
keep practicing, the result comes.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks, Vivienne, for being here. You can find
Thank
Vivienne
you.
at Be Your Own Beloved. And that's at Be Your Own Beloved on Instagram, beyourownbeloved.com. Is there anywhere else we can find you, Vivienne?
Facebook, I'm under the name Be Your Own Beloved.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's where you'll find Vivienne. And she has courses you can take. She also does photography as well, so portraits as well. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And I will be here tomorrow with Toy Smith, who's an impact and growth strategist at 10:15 a.m. And we're going to talk about motherhood as a source of power.
I'm going to watch this.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, Vivienne.
Bye.